All right. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Sutton. I'm the CEO of Environment and Culture Partners, and I'm joined by teammates today who are working on the carbon inventory project. Misha Eagle from New Buildings Institute is going to give us the presentation for today. One I'm particularly looking forward to because it's the first time we've had a real conversation about those of us who are producing energy or having it delivered and thinking about the details of including it in Energy Star Portfolio Manager. So this is an important session and I'm glad you're here for it. And then Danielle Sikowski, who's part of the Environment and Culture Partners team, is going to talk to us about signing up for the Carbon Day efforts and manage our question and answer period for us. As always, we have a presentation followed by office hours. And the office hours, we encourage you to stay and ask any individual questions you have about the work that you're doing to measure and monitor your energy. This project is supported by the New England Museum Association through an application to Institute of Museum and Library Services. We're delighted that they are supporting this kind of climate-focused work that supports so many institutions in the cultural sector. So I'm going to hand it off to Misha to get us started. Thank you all.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so today we're going to talk about on-site generation and then also delivered fuels. So that's like propane or fuel oil. So to get started, hopefully you were able to attend one of our earlier office hours where we did a little bit of a demo on how to get a building set up in Portfolio Manager. If you were not able to attend that, there is a recording on Environment and Culture Partners YouTube channel, I believe. So you can head over there and check that out. But assuming that you've already set up your building in Portfolio Manager, you can head to the Energy tab to add meters. And so we're just assuming that you haven't set up your meters for your building yet, and you have some sort of generation on site. Most typical is solar, but it could be wind as well. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So to get set up with on-site generation in Portfolio Manager, you need at least 2 electric meters. Your first one is going to be your electricity that's purchased from the grid. So that's, the utility bill that everyone has. That's the electric grid meter. And then you also need to have a meter for the electricity that you're generating on site. That's the on-site solar electricity meter. So you can see the screenshot after you hit that add meter button, you have the option to define what kind of meters you want to add. And it's a little bit small, but in this case, you would want to select electric purchased from the grid and generated from on-site solar. At least in our example, we're going to talk about solar today. And just one note before you get started on kind of the rest of this journey, you do want to make sure that your dates align between the 2 meters. It's really important for all of your meters in Portfolio Manager, but especially in this case to make sure that your dates of service align. So if you're going to input data for Carbon Day for 2022, you want to make sure you have, January 1st, 2022 through December 31st, 2022. So just to kind of orient you on what this actually looks like, the electric grid meter is shown here. This is a meter that we would expect pretty much every building to have if you have electric service. And so it's just your start date and end date that would coincide with your electric bill, your usage, typically in kilowatt hours. And then there's some optional fields like your cost, if it's green power, if they provide information about your peak demand, but those are all kind of extra. The main thing is just making sure you have your dates and your usage. And then this is the electric solar meter. So again, you have your start and end dates, and then you have these 2 new fields. So the first is the energy you actually used on site. And then the second is the energy that you sent back to the utility that you exported offsite. There's also some optional fields here, but you will be required to provide information about your renewable energy credits, your RECs. You see that REC ownership field to the far right. I believe that is a required field. So it just asks if you own those or if you sell those. Okay, so we took the time to look at what it actually, looks like in Portfolio Manager. But what does this really mean for your system, right? So this graphic was actually created by Energy Star. It's very helpful to kind of simplify everything down. So you have your rooftop system. And that generation is, going through an inverter and then a meter. Hopefully everyone should have some sort of meter that's tracking the energy that you're actually, collecting from the sun. And then from there, it goes into the main building electrical panel, and it can either go into the building to be used by the building, or if it's a time when you don't need that solar, you can send it back to your utility, and that's tracked through a utility meter. So that's kind of the high level overview. And then over the next few slides, we'll walk through kind of like how that corresponds to Portfolio Manager and which parts of this you actually need to care about. So the first one is what we're going to call G. And so that's the total energy that is produced by the system when the sun is shining, how many electrons are coming in. And like I said, this should be something that is tracked by the company that, installed your solar, whoever offers like the dashboard. This should be a number that you have. Then we also we also need to have the energy that you're using on site. So I've put a little star here because this is one of the fields that you'll have to input into Portfolio Manager. So the G, the total production, is important to know, but not one of the things that you actually have to input to Portfolio Manager. Whereas this A, so how much of that, all of that collected energy is actually going into your building, you need some way to track that in order to input it into Portfolio Manager. And then you'll also need the energy that you did not use and that you exported back to the grid. So any sort of excess that you had or that you couldn't use at the time, we're going to call that B. And then lastly, we have C, which is the electric grid meter. So that's just what you're pulling from the electric grid. Even if you didn't have solar on site, you should definitely have this information. Okay, so bringing it all back, trying to keep all of that in our heads, trying to keep the picture in our heads while we look at this table here. As a reminder, G is our total generation. C is the usage that was provided on your electric bill. And so you can see on the left-hand side, C is, again, just like your normal electric bill. And then B is the generation that's recognized by the utility. So that's what you're exporting back, what you're sending back to them, back to the utility. And A is going to be your total generation, which you should have that number, again, from your dashboard, and then subtract from that whatever the utility has told you that you exported off-site. So this is like the perfect world where you have all of this information. The utility company has provided item B. And I also want to note that, you may not have to rely on the utility company depending on whatever your monitoring system is for your solar system. You may just have item A. It depends on where your meters are at, basically. But if you kind of need to do the math, this is the way to do it. However, there is one big caveat to that, which is in some instances, the utility company only provides net usage. So next, we'll talk a little bit about that if you're in that situation. So in some cases, the utilities on your bill might only provide you with your net usage, which is the amount of energy that you pulled from them, your kind of normal electric bill, remember C, and then subtracting out whatever you sent to them from your solar system. So instead of having that information individually, they're kind of already doing the math for you. And then on your bill, you're just going to get this other number, which we're going to call N. So if you only have G, which is the total energy coming in from the sun, and N, which is the number that the utility already did this math for you, you can't calculate A or B. It's just not enough information. And again, A and B is the, how much is going to the building versus how much you're sending to the utility. So if this is the situation that you're in, and the way that you would know if you're in this situation is, looking at the numbers, you can kind of tell based on the scale, but also a lot of utility bills will just specifically say net usage. You'll want to make sure if you're signed up for a net metering program. That's another flag. But if it says net usage like this, on this bill example we have here, then you're going to have to take an alternative approach to reporting your consumption in Portfolio Manager. In this case, we would go back to the beginning and scratch what I said about having two distinct meters. You don't have enough information, again, to share what stayed on site and what went back to the utility. So in this case, what Energy Star has requested folks do is to report your net usage, so that's N, the one that they've already done the math for you, and then add that to your total generation coming from the system, and report that in your normal electric grid meter. So what would normally be just kind of your normal utility bill meter, report that N plus G in the usage column there. And the reason that they do that is because it does end up overestimating your electric usage a little bit, but they prefer to take that conservative approach. So at this point, I don't know if anyone has any burning questions where they're like, I'm just so confused. Maybe now would be a good time to just offer that opportunity up, but otherwise I can talk about delivered fuels and then we can kind of open it up to the overall Q&A. So is there anyone, maybe raise your hand if you have something that you really feel like is important for you to ask before maybe you forget. Okay, wanted to just give that opportunity. It looks like we're good. All right, so moving on to delivered fuels. So this is something we saw a lot in the Culture Over Carbon project. A lot of people struggled with how to make sense of, you're getting a propane or fuel oil delivery only every few months. The amount that you're getting is different. It's going to different buildings on, the same property. So hopefully we can help clear up some of that confusion here. It doesn't have to be too difficult. You have two pathways to enter your delivered fuels into Portfolio Manager. The first is to enter as bulk shipment dates based on the actual delivery date when you get that bulk delivery. Or you can do a little more work and make estimates about monthly allocations. And I'll talk a little bit in just a moment about which option might be best for you. Regardless of the option that you choose, just keep in mind that Portfolio Manager is really, what they care about is the annual total, not the individual monthly entries. So when they're calculating your EUI or your carbon intensity, it's just lumping it all together into an annual number. And also just keep in mind that don't make more work for yourself. You don't have to enter anything for months with zero use. So I mentioned these two pathways, right? One is just inputting the bulk delivery information as you have it, and then the other would be a little more work to come up with monthly allocations. So the best option for you depends on, first of all, your bandwidth and what's realistic, but also how you plan on using Portfolio Manager. If you really just want annual metrics like EUI or carbon intensity, then just go with option one, the easy way, just input the bulk deliveries and be done with it. However, if you're interested in some of the reporting functionality that Portfolio Manager offers, like this monthly consumption chart, which is a completely made up building and probably has no bearing on reality, so don't take this chart too seriously. But if you want to see your monthly like allocations, then you would want to go with option 2. So you can see, Danielle, if you click one more time, there should be a little box that'll come up. So I just wanted to kind of draw attention to the fact that this fake data that I input for a propane delivery, I believe, for a fake historic house, I went the monthly allocation route, but then I had a big gap in the data. And so you can see that if you were trying to use Portfolio Manager to look at your monthly trends, it just kind of shows up as this flat line here. So that's not very helpful for you, right? So that's kind of the scenario where you would want to go through that extra work. So option 1, the easy way. How to do it? It's pretty easy. Create the meter. So that's going back to that page that was at the very beginning of the presentation where you have your building set up, go to your energy tab, click add a meter, and there is just an option for, whatever fuel it might be. So propane or fuel oil, just select whatever is appropriate in your case. In this case, you want to make sure that you check this box, enter as delivery. So that's just signaling to Portfolio Manager that, yes, you're going to be inputting this bulk information. And in this case, it'll also ask you for the date the meter became active and things like that. But then all you have to do is enter your delivery date. So one single date, not a date range, and the associated quantity, which is typically gallons. So option 2, which I described as for folks who maybe want to have more detailed tracking, you'll still create the meter from the same page, but you will not check the enter as delivery box. In this case, it's more like an electric meter where you have to have your start date and your end date, as well as the gallons that you used. But this time, the gallons are going to be distributed into a monthly allocation. So let's say you got a delivery in October, and then you got another delivery in December. Then in this scenario, you would be doing the work to try to figure out, how much was used in between that period. And so there's a couple different ways that you can make that allocation. The first is just divide the quantity evenly across the months between deliveries. That obviously doesn't account for weather fluctuations, or so like if you have a cold snap and you use a lot more fuel, in let's say December than you did in November, then that's again not going to be super helpful if you're really trying to understand your use patterns. But again, in terms of Portfolio Manager's perspective, they don't care as long as all the numbers add up to the annual total. The other option is to use a gauge or reading from your tank, if that's something you have available. Most tanks should have at least a rudimentary gauge, but I'm not out there in the wild, so don't hold me to that. So I wanted to just talk about this tank gauge option because I think it's something that folks might not be familiar with. Typically, tanks are only filled to 80% to allow for expansion and temperature changes. And so we have just an example here. A rough rule of thumb is that the number of gallons you have remaining is your tank capacity, and then you multiply that by the gauge reading, which is the percentage that the tank is currently at. So in this example, you have a 500-gallon tank, and it says that it's 60% full. And you would like to know how much is remaining and how much has been used so that you can report that into Portfolio Manager because you know your dates. So in this case, we're going to assume that the max fill is 400 gallons because 80% of 500 is 400. The remaining, because it's at that 60%, is 300 gallons. And so that means that you've used 100 gallons because your theoretical max is 400, and you've got 300 remaining. And so this is, again, only for estimation purposes for folks who really want to try to kind of nerd out and understand their use patterns. Just make sure if you do go this route and you want to make these estimations, that these monthly allocations have to add up to the total delivery amount. So you need to, you still need to be doing good record keeping on when you're getting your deliveries and what the total gallons delivered is. Okay, so that's all I had to share with you. I did want to provide a link. The graphics for the solar generation, that came from a video about tracking on-site renewables in Portfolio Manager. So if you're a person who likes to learn by, watching something maybe a little bit more dynamic, although it is mostly just that graphic, you can follow the link to the YouTube video there. And then also Energy Star has an article about delivered fuels that goes over pretty much what I just shared on their help site as well. So I have those links here. And I think with that, I will turn it back over to Danielle.
Yeah, thank you, Misha. Great presentation as always. So everyone, thank you for being here. As you heard earlier, I'm Danielle Sikowski. I am the program manager at Environment and Culture Partners. So I just want to tell you about our next session of office hours. They're on April 18th at 2 p.m. Eastern. It's going to cover the instructions for uploading your Carbon Day data. As part of that, most of you know, and most of you are using Energy Star Portfolio Manager, but we know that not every institution is using that to monitor their energy use. So we'll have a way for those folks to share their energy data too. And as always, it'll be a time for you to ask us any questions that you have about inputting your data. All right. So now we're going to drop a link in the chat. I think Sarah's going to do that for us if she hasn't already. There it is. And it's on the screen here too, but we'd like to pause for just 30 seconds. I'm going to set a timer just to give you all an opportunity to sign up for Carbon Day if you haven't already. And once you get that form up, you'll see that your organization can remain anonymous. Of course, we would love to see your name, but we know that not all stakeholders are as enthusiastic about this kind of work. But we're watching this list grow, and we're so excited to see that the momentum is really building in this effort. Yeah, well, 30 seconds goes by really fast, but of course, if you're still doing that, please feel free to continue. So as you know, this is the first year that we're really building this collective movement in our culture, in the cultural sector, to measure and understand our energy use and share a representative number for the whole sector. So you've shown your engagement with this whole effort and environmental leadership by being here today. So we thank you for that. To energize participation, we are hoping that you will support the project further by sharing it and the sign up link with at least 2 of your colleagues, if not more. And we're happy to follow up with them. Our emails are on this next slide, so you can connect us that way or just share our emails. So thank you for that, and thank you for your participation. So I think we can open it up now for the Q&A. And feel free to raise your hands, and we can go about questions that way.
I see a question in the chat. This is a great question.
Great.
When adding a historic house that's been fully dismantled and moved and then reassembled, not exactly as it was, what year do you put that it was built? That's a great question and a very unique situation. What we found in the Culture over Carbon study was that the year that structure was built was not a strong indication of its EUI. And we've shared that information with Energy Star. So we're not too concerned about that date. I would suggest that in this case, you would probably want to put, I guess it would depend on how much had been changed about the components. If it's just a matter of things kind of being rearranged in terms of the footprint, I would probably put the original build date. because that would that would track more with like the type of windows that it might have, or the type of envelope it might have, or the roof. But if you did complete upgrades as a part of that move, then I would probably lean towards putting the newer year, whatever the, reopening year was. Hopefully that makes sense.
And I see someone's hand up, Joey. If you feel free to unmute and go ahead and ask us your question.
Thank you. It's Joy or Joie, depending on how French you're feeling. So I'm with Historic New England, and I just started just under 3 weeks ago. So, and I know you've worked with, Marissa has done some of this work for our organization in the past. So she may have asked this question, so my apologies if it's a repeat. We have some properties that have multiple buildings, but not all of those buildings are necessarily used as museum space or necessarily historic house space. And I'm saying that because we have some buildings and properties that have tenants that stay there. There's an apartment we rent out, or in the case of the headquarters, there are other businesses that are on other floors of the building that Historic New England owns. And so we don't have access to, in most cases, I think there's one exception, but we don't have access to that energy data because that's through their private accounts. When they rent the apartment, they set up so it's a residence basically. Should I be trying to count that or not? Because I think it's technically not museum space, right? But the only time that we end up dealing with the energy is if it's temporarily vacant, right? It gets switched back to us, and then when somebody new moves in, it switches back. Yeah, that was one question I had. So.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining, and welcome. I hope that things are going well with your first 3 weeks.
Yes, those are good.
Good. So that's a great question. I think that, I would say, don't worry about it too much. Report the data that you have, and especially if it's being used as tenant space, then I wouldn't worry about that. But I see that Sarah is unmuted, so I don't know, Sarah, if you wanted to add something to that. I'm just going to give you the opportunity.
Only that I wanted to say there was a question in the chat, but you've answered just as I would have, so I'm feeling good about it. Thanks.
Okay.
And then I had one other, what I hope is a quick question. A lot of our buildings are very seasonal, including a couple that like everything just gets turned off in the winter, and the only electricity usage may be for an alarm system. And I'm not so much concerned about how to enter that. I mean, I'll still enter it, but I did have some concerns about how it might affect overall data. And the reason I say that is, if there are plenty of parts of because I know part of this project is to collect enough data that this can be, that things like historic houses can have their own listing on Energy Star. So I didn't know if there was a way to just note the seasonality of that, if I should just put that like in notes, or if it doesn't even matter. If you're figuring it's coming from all over the country, it's all going to be a wash and average out in the end. And I'm sure it's an issue that a lot of people who have properties in the Northeast will run into, which is where all of ours are. So,
and Misha, do you see that also that Valerie has asked a related question about seasonal use and number of employees, and how do you do that recording? It might be tied together.
Okay, yeah. So great question, Joy. Let me just read Valerie's question so we can kind of try to answer them together. The question in the chat is, with seasonal use of the building and the number of employees, how do we handle that in the building use? Should we average the use? So it sounds like kind of similar questions. So first, in terms of averaging the use, the answer would be no. We do want, Energy Star wants monthly data. So even if it's functionally zero, you know, your electric bill, for example, just, you know, input that or leave that month blank, whatever is the appropriate case. And then, you know, it will kind of calculate your metrics, again, based on the annual use. It's just some of those dashboards and things for the monthly. That's just where that would show up. In terms of the score for the sector, that's a really good flag and something that we are aware of. And so we will be coming out with a survey in the next couple of months where we're going to ask, try to gather the data that we need to hand to Energy Star to create that score for the sector. And one of the questions is, what is your cultural institution type? Because we recognize that historic houses are very different than children's museums, and geographical location, as you mentioned, that's also a consideration. But the idea is that we get enough respondents from across the country that at least within those subgroupings of, you know, types, that it kind of averages out. And they come up with a kind of representative profile of what that building type looks like. That part is where the Energy Star magic happens, and they're doing that statistical analysis, and they'll figure out, you know, if there's enough individuals within that cohort to create kind of that robust score number. And it may turn out that, you know, once we have all of the data from all the institutions, they say, you know what, we don't even have to group it by historic houses and children's museums, because it just kind of comes out in the wash. If you think about like even commercial, like office buildings, there's a huge variety in that building stock, right? Maybe their use is similar, but there's definitely differences. And so if you have a large enough sample, it should be okay. So definitely a great question. And you could definitely be doing the analysis with us. And I guess I'll just ask Valerie if I answered your question, or if I didn't answer your question, feel free to type more in the chat. But yeah, generally in terms of portfolio manager, just input, you know, what the reality is, and that'll be just fine. Okay. It looks like a question from Alexandria. We have 3 separate museum buildings. Will we need to have 3 separate accounts / portfolios? So no, you do not need separate accounts. You can get set up with one portfolio manager account. And then what you'll do is you'll want to set up 3 distinct buildings. If there are multiple buildings on the same campus, you can set up a campus and, you know, name the campus and then create each individual building that's kind of like within that campus. That's also an option. Definitely recommend that you check out the tutorial that we gave. I believe it was back in October, maybe it was the December office hours. We went through kind of like the whole process of how to set up multiple buildings under the same account. Great. Sounds like I answered that question. These are all great questions. And, you know, I think that Danielle showed our email addresses. So Joy has another question, but I will just mention, if you're shy and you don't want to ask your question here, you can always reach out to us, and we're happy to, you know, answer ad hoc questions as needed, especially if you're new to portfolio manager and you need help getting set up. Joy?
Sure, thank you. So as I'm setting up our buildings in the portfolio manager and the property, setting up the properties, one thing that I keep getting are these notifications that there are some energy providers that can provide either set things up so it can update into Energy Star automatically, or provide aggregated information, some for quite a while. Like I think Rhode Island can do like a 4-year time span, and some of the providers there. I'm totally fine with entering things manually. I'd love to automate some of this stuff if I could. And I wondered if there's anybody who's had experience with that with Energy Star, and, did it work, or was it too much of a hassle? Or I guess this might even be more of a question for people who are participating and also doing this, or maybe one of you folks can answer that question. I'm mostly just wondering how well it worked out, because I have 39 properties that I'll be entering information for, and some of them have multiple buildings. And so, if some of those can be automated, that's fantastic. But I'm curious what other people's experience with that might be.
Well, I can't speak from personal experience, so I'll kind of give everyone a chance to collect their thoughts and decide if they want to speak up. Just to give you a little bit of information, there is the option to do a bulk upload, especially as you're getting these set up for the very first time. I don't know if you saw that as an option, but you can do a bulk upload where you are uploading the data from multiple buildings at once. So that could help kind of streamline that process. And then in terms of the ongoing input, I've only heard anecdotal feedback from one other person who participated in this project and said that for them, they found that there were some issues with their provider, the data that they were putting in Portfolio Manager not actually matching their bill.
Okay.
I don't know if that was just a one-off thing or if it got resolved, but that's the only flag, and that was only one issue. I think the functionality exists for a reason, and it would be great to be able to use it. I guess my caution would just be, if you do use it, maybe especially like the first couple months, still go in and just double check that the numbers are matching what you would expect.
Yeah, and I did notice on at least one of them, it's not direct. What they do is send you a spreadsheet that you can then upload.
Okay.
So some of them, it seemed to be the case. And I think I was thinking a lot in terms of it would be nice for some of the historic data, so we could see trends beyond just the past year. Although I'm planning to keep it up to date for our for our own use and beyond just this year. So. All right, yeah, thank you.
Joy, I'm recalling that the Detroit Zoo, so imagine, a gazillion buildings with lots of animal holding centers, and now they went from 1 meter to at least 20. And they do have a consulting company that comes and actually reads meters and does the upload. So what they're basically is outsourcing the upload data. And if you wanted to talk to them about that experience, I'd be happy to connect you, but it is Detroit, so it's not a New England example.
Yeah, it sounds like they're probably all on one campus, right?
True, not distributed among 5 or more states.
We're across 5 states, so.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, if no one has any other questions at this time, I don't know, Danielle, do you want to give our spiel about staying on, next steps, all that good stuff?
Sure. Yeah. Well, we're happy to hang out for a bit longer. If you feel like you just want to talk to us some more, or feel a little bit shyer about asking questions from everyone else, we'll hang out. But if everyone else wants to take off, please feel free to do so. And thank you again for participating and being here today. We're very appreciative.